You know, of all the crises we face in Canada right now, freedom of thought, conscience, and expression might just be the greatest. Our Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees these things: freedom of conscience, religion, belief, thought, expression, all of the ways that we communicate our deepest beliefs and values and principles to other people. And right in the Charter, it says that the purpose of guaranteeing freedom of expression is to promote the search for and the attainment of truth, for participation in social and political decision making, and also for the opportunity for individual self fulfillment through expression. So the Charter itself says these things are important for personal well being, for the collective search for truth, and also for holding a society together. But we're seeing an increase in formal limitations on freedom of expression. If you look at Bills C11 or C36, for example, but also a less formal, more insidious culture of censorship and silence creeping in to all facets of society, to government, media, our educational institutions. And I've been wondering, maybe in the art world too. You know, I recently had the chance to sit down with an incredible Canadian artist, Josh Thiessen. He's an international award-winning artist based in Stony Creek. He's best known for his hyper-surrealist oil paintings, which reflect the interaction between the human-made world and the natural world, and also focus on the destruction of civilizations and our loss of freedom. In 2012, Josh was listed by the Huffington Post as one of the world's top 10 prodigy artists and the only male prodigy in North America by psychologist Dr. Joanne Ruth Satz. The Art Renewal Center designated him Associate Living Master, and he has been mentored by acclaimed Canadian wildlife artist Robert Bateman. He's exhibited in over 100 exhibitions, including the National Gallery of Canada. Josh has won over 60 awards and honors, including the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal and Canada's Top 20 Under 20 for his artistic accomplishment and his philanthropic work. Josh's artistic abilities, I think, are just one aspect that make his personality remarkable. He also has great insight into the challenges of our time, how we got here, and how we can find some hope and meaning moving forward. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with this incredible artist and human being, and I really hope you will too. Well, Josh, I'm so incredibly intrigued and delighted to be chatting with you today. I don't talk to artists very often, but I think we have a number of crises in our country right now, and freedom of expression is one of them, and the arts is one way of expressing ourselves, perhaps the most powerful way, to be honest. And we should talk about that in a little bit. But let's
Mhm.
start with your work for viewers who aren't familiar with it. Art is so powerful. It can communicate messages and ideas that words often can't. And your work is an incredible, I think I've seen you describe it as narrative hyperrealism, and the degree of detail and realism, especially in your animals, is just really remarkable. They leap off the page. I know people have said, who have tried to touch things in your work because it looks like like you can, like it's three-dimensional. But can you tell us a little bit about the themes in your work, especially these beautiful images of animals roaming these abandoned remnants of human civilization?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I was mentored under Robert Bateman when I was 15 years old. I had the incredible honor of studying with him out in British Columbia. And from that experience, I got involved in local conservation efforts. I always had a love for the natural world, for painting animals. And I transitioned from, chalk pastel to acrylic to oil paint. And eventually I wanted to find my own voice and not just be pigeonholed to the wildlife art world where animals are in their natural habitats, but to reflect how today we're often experiencing human-animal conflicts and animals coming into the cities. Um, and because I have an interest in philosophy and specifically biblical studies was an area of research in my post-secondary degree, I was fascinated with this biblical prophet Isaiah, and he has these poetic word pictures of animals like hyenas taking over Babylon. And as you know, Babylon was like this world empire, this civilization that no one thought would ever collapse. And yet Isaiah had this, imagination to see that, one day there would be a demise because, Babylon exploited the land, they exploited people, they oppressed, Israel and the surrounding nations. So I began thinking, with my work, how can I have a modern interpretation of that, of animals, roaming lands, whether that be orcas swimming down a canyon river, or a sandhill crane in an abandoned Greek temple. I'm just really fascinated with nature's reclamation.
It's so fascinating to me. I think the thing that I mean, in addition to the technical proficiency of your work, the thing that really struck me initially when I saw it in person, I've had the pleasure of doing that. What struck me is how you've reversed the power imbalance that I think humans now, we have this tendency to feel like we've conquered the chaos or the riskiness of life, or the uncontrollable elements of life, that we've conquered
Mhm.
the natural world, right? With our science, our technology, our mastery of all. But your works are, they let the animal rise to the surface again and almost roam peacefully in our disasters and our mistakes and what we couldn't stick around to control anymore. Is that a
Yeah.
conscious choice on your part? Is that how you see humanity evolving? Are we on a path of self-destruction? Will we very soon abandon our built structures, including our political structures?
So I think it is fascinating just seeing the development through history, um, especially, philosophically, the idea of human centrism or anthropocentrism, where
Mm.
humans are at the center of the universe. And often that creates this arrogance that, we're owners of the earth as opposed to stewards. And that manifests in so many different ways. But leadership is one of them, where I, believe in servant leadership as opposed to, totalitarian rule. And, you touched on science, and, of course, you know much more about this than I do, but Enlightenment philosophers really put forward this notion of the world was just this grand mechanism. And when it was disenchanted, it could be exploited for various ends. And, I'm so grateful for all that science has accomplished, all the discoveries that are made. I'm very, pro-science that way. But, science isn't neutral. There are people
Mm.
behind it that have nefarious ends. And unfortunately, when politics, gets it involved, ultimate power corrupts. And so I think that has become a more prevalent theme in my work. And what I like about animals is that animals disarm us, because my view is there's a moral innocence to animals, and they follow their biological design that the creator has given them. But we as humans, we do have a unique special role as the species that has, dominion. But I feel this is a righteous dominion, this stewardship that we have, to be faithful with the land that we've been given.
So interesting. You mentioned the Enlightenment, and we revered it for a long time, I think, for its ability to
Mhm.
put reason at the center of
Exactly.
scientific inquiry and politics, and maybe even things like poetry and art and
Yeah.
literature. But do you think that we have taken that too far? I can't remember where, but I feel like I read something disparaging that you had to say about the Greeks. And was it along
Oh,
the
yes.
lines of them being too anthropocentric, with being too arrogant? And we all know the Greeks. I mean, think of the tragedies and Oedipus, and um, what happens, the consequences for us when we become too arrogant, too hubristic. Do you think that we are living now sort of the lineage or the long-term effects of the Enlightenment's heavy focus on what reason can do for us, as opposed to, I think you put it so eloquently, the moral innocence of the animals who we often think of as lacking reason?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly what from studying a bit of Plato that I picked up on, and later Gnostic teaching, I think takes it to an extreme of there's this, as you're familiar with, the great chain of being, where humans are at the top of the totem pole, so to speak, because they can reason. And I think that unfortunately what happens is there's a kind of a progression to more sort of a disembodied way of living, where the Platonic ideals, which I totally, believe in, truth and beauty and, rational minds, that we have to be careful to still affirm the goodness of the natural world, the goodness of animals. And I think art does that, because art is kind of this mediator, I believe, between abstract ideas and embodied living. And creativity and story appeals to our affections, our emotions. And I think we have to be very careful with this, because of course, narrative and storytelling can also be deceptive. So artists do have to, have virtue. And you've talked so much about civic virtue, which I totally resonate with. But because like modern psychology has proven that unfortunately humans respond more to arguments based on emotion and story and art, as opposed to rational logic and reasoning, that the arts have a real key role in shaping our narratives and how we view the world that we live in.
It gives artists and writers and philosophers and psychologists incredible power, doesn't it? That I think we often don't think we have. And you're right. I mean, as someone who studied philosophy for a long time, and in the analytic tradition, which focuses on reason and the idea that reason is the ultimate motivator, it turns out that statistically, in practice, that isn't true for most people. That emotions and that story are far more powerful, and that you can communicate with imagery, intentional imagery, something much more powerful and more efficient. I was very struck. I saw you in an interview, I think, quoting the beautiful poem from T.S. Eliot, Wasteland. And you correct me if I get this line wrong, but something about great civilizations being sort of arrogant and thinking that they will be permanent and powerful, and yet they all eventually fade. I'm so curious to ask you, do you think that as humans we're ultimately self-destructive? I mean, is Eliot getting at this idea that our achievements will always dissolve, because we will always, whether it's that we make them poorly in the first place and so they don't have longevity, or we make them well but then we destroy them for some reason? Do you think that humans are self-destructive by nature?
I mean, I do, believe in this theological notion of the sinful nature, that as humans, Alexander Solzhenitsyn has talked about the line between good and evil runs to the heart of every person, which is this idea that we all have a tendency towards self-destruction and wrongdoing. And I think what concerns me is that in the society that we're living in, we have more of a, I guess, Manichaean or dualistic approach, where we lump certain groups of people, they're the bad ones, whether that be political lines or class lines or whatever, that we have to have a great humility there, that we all have these tendencies towards evil. And yeah, I think historically speaking, that uh, when there was this Judeo-Christian worldview that shaped society, that people cultivated these virtues so we could have a free society, but people had restraints on those freedoms, that they had like an external moral framework that they desired to align themselves. And I think now with what Charles Taylor has talked about, this expressive individualism, this move from authority to authenticity, I think this self-destruction is just ramping up now because each person is a law unto himself. And I think that's where we're going to get more conflicts, because we don't have this shared moral fabric.
So is that due to too much self-reliance, that we don't have a sort of compass outside of ourselves to align our lives with?
Yeah.
And or is it sort of a fundamental loss of meaning? And I ask that because I feel like every interesting person I talk with these days is talking about meaning and how we just don't have it in the 21st century. And whether that's because fewer of us are religious than ever before, whether it's because of this sort of postmodern free fall, whether it's because science has dominated too much and science ultimately itself can't give meaning, or it's a combination of these things. But do you think that we are maybe historically unique in our loss of meaning or absence of meaning?
Yeah, and I could take this question in a number of different directions, but it's a great question.
With definite
So
theological overtones to it, I know.
yeah, and definitely, one of the major themes in my work is trying to cultivate wonder and awe through an appreciation for the natural world, but most importantly is indicating that this world, this universe, isn't just a cosmic accident. And I think that the universe that we've been living in has been lovingly created. And oftentimes people who go out and see a beautiful sunset, or they ascend to the top of a mountain, even psychology studies have confirmed this, but they open themselves up to the idea that there might be something bigger or grander beyond themselves. And I hope that my art can point people to that, because I think the problem with today is that we don't have a real good grasp on the frailty of civilization, of scientific progress, and this branches off in so many different applications of that. But similar to finding meaning and purpose, that of course we can find meaning and purpose without God, for instance, a religious framework that you can find meaning, whether it be Platonic ideals, these things that we strive for, or the Stoics. But it seems that when there is an absolute truth, like a creator God, there's more of a rootedness to following that creator's wise ways of flourishing in this world. And when we go against the grain of the universe, as it's been said, we get splinters. And I think today we're getting many splinters.
Moral splinters. Isn't that a beautiful idea? But also beautiful, you mentioned wonder and awe, and that requires, or maybe creates, a sense of humility, doesn't it? When people go out into nature and you stand at the foot of a mountain and look up, or you stand at the edge of the ocean and look out, you feel that you are very small within your environment. And I think your work certainly communicates that. You remind me of the title, but the whale swimming behind it, the ruins.
Yeah, the abandoned cathedral. Yeah, whale hymn is definitely one, because I was in England, and there's this old cathedral, St. Dunstan's on Easton, had been bombed after World War II and just been ruined. And so I envisioned this whale. Pardon? Yeah, still is there. And I mean, I have another painting of a Indian elephant breaking off its chains and running out of a Hindu temple. And so often animals are chained, and so I want to see them, break free. But so often as humans, we want to control nature and not let it free. So, but yeah, wonder is I think a driving ecological virtue and a virtue for all political discourse.
It makes me sad. It feels to me like we have so much less wonder and awe in our lives, and that involves a kind of living the questions and being comfortable. I just wrote an essay on uncertainty. I was thinking about this a lot, and how we seem to be trying so hard to avoid unknowns and the discomfort of uncertainty. But it's a beautiful thing, isn't it, to feel a kind of amazement at something you don't understand that's bigger than you are. I wanted to ask you, you're an artist, a beautiful artist, but I know that faith is also very important in your life. And I'm sure our viewers can get a sense from that just listening to you talk so far. But what is your sense of the state of both freedom of artistic expression in Canada these days, but also freedom of religion or conscience? I mean, we've seen pastors jailed over the last 2 years for violating COVID policies. And I'm a little out of touch with the art world now, but I'm wondering, do you feel, I mean, we have censorship bills that are on the table or passed, and that's going to get much more restrictive, I think, in terms of what we're allowed to say with our words on the internet. Do you feel a kind of stricture of your artistic expression, and especially expression along theological lines in Canada?
Yeah, so I think the history of art has revealed that over the centuries, a lot of the constraints have been thrown off, whether it be a move from representational art to abstract art, or even like the moral strictures and the sexual revolution coincided with the surrealist movement and other postmodern movements of art. And so I want to be clear, though, that it's really often been artists who have often been the most sensitive to calling out injustice and evils throughout history. Think of Pablo Picasso's famous Guernica painting that was very much a anti-war message, opposing the Nazis. And I think that what's happened is that over time, we kind of have these two wings of the art world. We have the art establishment, and then like that would be more like academia, and that discourse, art critics and art historians and art theorists. And then we have like more the commercial gallery world, and that's more the world that I occupy in, as I represented from galleries in New York and had shows in LA and elsewhere, and also here in Canada. I've had so many great art collectors of my work, and so the commercial gallery has focused more on the formalist qualities of art, but the whole the postmodern notion of beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or moral relativism, I think that is waning, because I see kind of an increasing politicization in all sectors. I've often found that in Canada, it tends to skew more towards the art establishment, where you have more gatekeepers and more of a dogmatic approach, where art is more conceptually driven or politically driven. And in comparing the US and Canada, Canada does have many more art grants, and the Canada Arts Council is very generous that way. But one thing I've noticed over the years, that it's very driven by the artist having to have a certain political disposition, usually very far left, and it's become quite an echo chamber. And I see that to some extent too with galleries, where there's in a different way, art critics, popular art critics like Jerry Saltz, they're very, very far left. And I mean, there's many things that I agree with those artists and critics on. Like, I don't kind of neatly fall into the boxes of like left wing or right wing, because like my faith, my you know apprenticeship to following the way of Jesus means that I won't be co-opted by these ethical packages that politics seems to hand to us. So I've though been pleasantly surprised how there has been an openness in some of these American galleries, that they know I am a Christian. I don't push it through my work. It's not overtly explicit, but that I've had conversations with gallery owners about it. Um, if I'm honest, I think that the Canadian art market is just a lot smaller. So Toronto isn't known as a place with a lot of commercial galleries at all. So I've just gone where my work has been accepted. And while maybe the art world is kind of an echo chamber, politically speaking, I have seen more and more of an openness to spirituality and exploring that. And so I think the hold of modernism, that kind of militant atheism, I think has definitely waned. Top galleries have shows about shamanism in New York City. It's very in vogue. So there's definitely a lot of change in the art world. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
Well, it's really interesting to me because if we are going to see words more carefully regulated on the internet, but we don't
Mhm,
see a parallel kind of censorship in the art world when it comes to visual imagery, it might be interesting to watch how
mhm,
dissenting voices or contrary voices or different themes emerge visually as opposed to in the written word through literature or online and social media or through journalism. So it'd be very interesting to see how that develops as we move forward and out of this pandemic situation, and as we deal with this
mhm.
climate issue and transgenderism and the Roe versus Wade and all these things that we seem to be in such a crisis morally, socially, politically. And humans always have to work those things out somehow, right? If we can't work them out with our words, then maybe it's going to be the visual artists or the musical artists who work those things out for us.
Yeah, I definitely hope so. And I mean, if I'm honest though, during this pandemic, I've sadly just witnessed how many artists and creatives seem to have been co-opted by pushing forward a narrative with the pandemic, like artists who are paid off to do Instagram ads for get your vaccine or social
Hmm.
distance. And I mean, I
Do you
I'm
mean
not against
graphic
artists.
artists who are hired for campaigns? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, hired for campaigns. I find that's very cringy. It's like, I guess where I'm a bit concerned with where the art world is going is and this is very extreme, but of course, with the Soviet era art, like I grew up in Russia, and we saw these grand sculptures that were commissioned for artists to basically represent this utopia of communism. And I don't think we're that extreme today, but I have heard politicians and various, like the National Endowment for the Arts and those type of political social programs, that they actually see art as a way to push forward
Mm.
their political agenda that the current administration is in. And I think art should be exposing, politics, exposing any injustices that are seen. And I hope to see more of that. I do see some artists, certainly in the environmentalist world. Many artists like myself are exposing that, but in some issues that are more aligned to the right, there's definitely a reticence for artists to speak out because they're afraid that they'll be censored by the art magazines or galleries.
Well, the imagery is so powerful. I mean, thinking of communist propaganda, visual propaganda that was used to support ideological, and I'm thinking, the fist, the iron fist held
Yes.
in the air and
Yeah.
flags. And so, I mean, it's so much more powerful, and it lingers in the memory so much more than written word tends to do. I'm very glad you brought up Russia. It's been very clear to me over the last couple
Sure.
of years that when I started hearing from people who were worried about the let's say the broader political directions of our country and limitations of individual freedom, and this push towards collectivism and doing your part for the group, and so many of the people expressing those concerns had, let me say, last names that were hard to pronounce, and that's because
Mhm.
many of them were from parts of the world that have really struggled with freedom and independence. So many of them were from Eastern Europe, they were from Russia, they were from Germany, whether they were on, whether they had a Jewish lineage or a German lineage. Some were from South Africa. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about your experience with Russia? I know your parents went there as missionaries. Your father was a professor, I believe, right? And was this the mid 90s or late 90s, just when Russia was starting to
Yes.
sort of come out of, they're trying to remake themselves in some sense.
Yes.
A little bit
Yes.
more,
So
I don't know how much you remember, but your parents, I'm sure.
no, yeah. So yeah, my parents went in the early 90s and the Iron Curtain had shortly fallen. So foreigners were able to enter the country and they were invited as professors to in the theological school to help train young pastors as there's more of a religious openness in the country.
Mhm.
And so I was born in 95 into this world where
In
um,
Russia.
in Russia, yeah, yeah. I was born in Moscow and lived in Krasnodar for the first 6 years of my life. So we knew that, and we had heard many stories of people whose grandparents or uncles had been taken off to the gulag, and how there was just a deep sadness and mourning that still was like a heavy blanket over the Russian people. And so of course maybe some saw the hope of freedom, and then now where we see where we are now with Russia invading Ukraine, and Putin being part of the KGB, head KGB. It's sad to see where things have gone. And interestingly, I recently read the Gulag Archipelago, the book, and I was just fascinated, um, digging into the history more. I was so young, obviously, when I lived in Russia, but just hearing these stories of how family members turned on one another so easily when there was that fear and panic, and that kind of false utopic idea that if we get out the bad eggs, we can live in this grand world. So yeah, I can see why some people see parallels to today.
That's so interesting. There's this kind of purity focus today, isn't there? And with such parallels to the Russian context. And I've often wondered where that comes from. I think we have a long-standing obsession with purity, that millennia old obsession with purity to sort of cleanse the tribe of what might threaten it. Um, but is it that, or is it about our own desire to be let off the hook, morally speaking? So as long as we can blame someone else, as long as we can locate, the fault in our stars in somebody else, then we can sort of absolve ourselves of responsibility. It's just striking to me hearing you
Mhm.
talk about that issue in Russia and how we seem to be cycling through that again. Do you have any insight into whether or not is that tendency within the individual born from broader political movements, Or do you think it's the other way around? Do we see
Mm.
this tendency to kind of scapegoat each other and gaslight each other, and then that creates a certain political movement? Do you have any sense of which comes first?
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is probably reaching the limits of my training, but
Well, that's where the
I
interesting
do.
things happen, so that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is often, a history of scapegoating. I was recently reading about the bubonic plague and the Black Death in the medieval ages, and apparently the Jews were the ones that were scapegoated and blamed for all the deaths, and we seem to need someone to blame. And that is, I think, just part of the human condition that's hard to get out of. And I think, with the Stalinist Russia and the communism, that there was just a passivity. A lot of academics in the early 1900s would have never thought that Russia would return to medieval era torture in order to do what their goals were, to what they aspired to. And so I think there can be kind of a passivity when power is not kept in check, and also the idea of like a moral vacuum. And I think that's what happened in Russia, that the Orthodox Church had its power and influence had waned, and it was in a way co-opted, like in many ways it has been to today, where it's kind of rubber stamped. The leader of its the leaders of its day, the dictatorships. And so yeah, I think people see political ideology as something that fills that vacuum for meaning. And so whether they have to do some morally unseemly thing, it's justified because of the new world that they think that the ideology can produce.
Mm. I'm trying to segue here to another fascinating part of your life. And I think there is a segue because there are interesting questions here about what kinds of societies need to exist, or what sort of social structures, or what sort of atmosphere of freedom needs to exist for certain exceptional persons to emerge and thrive. And I hope I'm not embarrassing you to say, I think this is quite well known about you, that you have been called a prodigy, an art prodigy. And I don't mean that in any casual sense. You've had, I mean, psychologists have studied you, and have psychologist Joanne Ruthsatz in particular has studied you, and your brother, which is a fascinating story, has been called a musical prodigy. And I want to ask you a series of questions about this because I think it's so interesting. But can we start with her explanation of why you might have become a prodigy in the first place? And I was reading her fascinating account about how your mother, when she was pregnant with you, had a traumatic experience in Russia, and that's possibly linked and almost unbelievably to your exceptional talent now. Do you want to tell that story a little bit in your own words?
Yeah, so in Russia, there was in the 90s, a crime ring going around, cutting out full-term mothers while they're pregnant and extracting the babies and then selling them on the black market to Westerners. And my mom and dad didn't know that at the time, but they had a traumatic experience where a masked man attempted to break into our flat. And miraculously, my dad, who was much smaller than this intruder, was able to fight him off and push back the door. But my mom, in the meantime, while she was running to the door to help my dad, she tripped and fell on her stomach. And this was, she was almost ready to give birth to me. And I was born with complications, but it wasn't until and I was given, many drugs. That's what was normal in the Russian hospitals. They just, drugged up the mothers, and the babies, sadly, I think had side effects. And I was very lethargic when I was born. I wouldn't wake up. I constantly slept and slept. So it wasn't though until many years later. So I became an artist at a very young age and started exhibiting, artistic abilities at 3, 4 years old, when my Russian nanny noticed I was doing lots of arts and crafts at advanced stage. But like I was saying, many years later, a psychology professor from Ohio State University who studies prodigies, she came across my work from a Huffington Post article that listed me as 10 prodigies, art prodigies you should know in the world. And unbeknownst to me, they included my work, which was quite surprising. So Dr. Rusatz, then she drove up through a blizzard to her place in Canada and did IQ testing and also autism quotient testing, because her research shows a link between prodigiousness and autism, but that her genetic studies have shown basically on the chromosome that is associated with autism, prodigious abilities that often don't come with the social deficits that autism has. So she also wanted to know if I had any siblings, and she studied my brother as well. And
it was a windfall for her.
Yeah. And so she then discovered, oh, Zach had all these like 10 concussions, and then he became just fascinated with music and voraciously studying music theory and mastering the 8-string guitar. And she started putting the pieces together. Like, he had these traumatic head injuries, and then I also had, she theorized, a traumatic head injury in vitro in Russia. And she then wrote about this in her book, The Prodigy's Cousin, if people want to read more of the story. But it was just amazing that these head injuries, which could cause so much damage, brought about something good in both of us.
The thing that's so, I mean, in addition to the fact that this could happen twice in one family, the thing that I find so fascinating about it is this tendency of the human brain, or the capacity to compensate for injury or suffering or challenges. If I understand her work correctly, the theory is that there can be this left hemisphere trauma, and then that can be compensated for by something in the right hemisphere, and they become super active or super focused. But that is an interesting metaphor, isn't it, for life more generally, that so often good comes out of bad. So often excellence or deep insight or genius comes out of trauma and challenge and near complete brokenness. You must think about that. I do you reflect on this phoenix from the ashes sort of theme to your life?
Yeah, definitely. And it relates to other areas of my life as well, where my family, sadly, we contracted Lyme disease in Russia. And sadly, because of that, my parents in the early 2000s weren't able to return to their full-time work. And so we were basically stuck in Canada. My mom and dad got sick first, and my brother and I, we had symptoms as well. But if it weren't for the fact that we had been granted in Canada, my artistic talent probably wouldn't have been developed. I had artist mentors come alongside me and, think of exhibiting my work to the public, which my parents wouldn't have done likely. And so it is amazing, this theme of beauty coming from ashes.
We can feel, I think a lot of people feel really defeated right now, worried, anxious about the future. Like there's no way out. Like we can't get back to, Canada being the greatest country in the world, that we can't get back to a state of freedom. But, if your story is any lesson for us, and so many, heroes of the past or great minds of the past, I think have shown us this, that very often that's what it takes in order for something more beautiful to be born. You need to have
Mhm,
destruction, and there's a kind of a cathartic theme there, isn't there? That you almost
mhm.
need, you need the pain and the suffering in order to produce something beautiful and insightful. And I want to be mindful of your time, but I just want to ask you a couple of questions about, what do you see for the future? I know that in your work you explore, the theme of sort of a restlessness of humans to get out of this fallen world and return to a more perfect world. What do you see humans doing in the next year, in the next decade, in the next 50 years to try to grapple with or resolve the state that we're in?
Uh, yeah, so one thing I didn't mention earlier, but I see. Well, I did allude to how artists are the ones who often call out injustice, and I
Mm,
think that in this pandemic, it has been a wake up call for many people that they things that they would never thought would have happened in the West, like vaccine travel mandates or people losing their jobs because they didn't have a medical intervention like in your case. And I'm inspired by people of you who, based on their convictions, would take a stand like that. I think I would like to see just practically speaking, is really a return to nature and to things like
mm,
being in unity with our ecosystems, and to affirm kind of this embeddedness that we have. I've been discouraged because on the one hand, I see so much progress with recognizing things within the ecological crisis, and so many scientists calling things out and warning us. But then so quickly we've given a free pass to, on the one hand, oil companies have been exposed for misinformation campaigns to cover up their, oil spills and many other things. But then when you look at pharmaceutical companies, they've been given legal immunity, they've paid billions and billions and billions of dollars in fines. And yet, in many ways, the capitalism that drives the oil companies also drives the pharmaceutical companies. But yeah, it seems like many within the environmentalist community has turned a blind eye to that. And I think we need to hold accountable big business, and also just not have this constant trust that, well, medical or scientific interventions are going to save us. They're going to be our salvation and our religion. And I think I hope in the coming years that we will move towards a direction where we can have and continue to have free discourse and debate over these issues, because in a free and thriving society, we need to be able to talk with people who have different religious, political, or medical persuasions on various issues. So I think that's what hopefully my art and my writing will continue to address.
Yes, we haven't even talked about your writing. I know you've written some beautiful essays, and I have no doubt that you will continue to explore many of the things we've talked about today in your art. And I think you are, not just an artist, but a theologian in a way, a philosopher, clearly a deep thinker. And I have great respect and gratitude for all of those dimensions of yourself. Can you finish just by giving us a sense of where people can find you, and maybe telling us a little bit about your Streams in the Wasteland book that accompanies your new body of work?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. So yeah, my second monograph art book is called Streams in the Wasteland, and it features my latest painting series over the last 6 years. And
I
so
think we can see
it can
it
be,
over your left
yeah,
shoulder, right? Is that your book there?
yeah, it's on left
Beautiful,
shoulder. I have it here. Kind of see it
beautiful.
there. And so it also includes the painting stories that accompany each work and my creative process. And so it's really a book for, art lovers, people who love nature, and also anyone who wants to think deeply about our relationship with the earth, our relationship to civilizations, as we've talked about early. So it's available on Amazon and also on my website at joshtiessen.com.
That's wonderful. And what's your brother's unique contribution to the book? I know this is
Yes,
very,
thank you for
yeah, I
reminding.
want to
So
remind you, it's very fascinating and unique.
yes, yeah, so this was a collaborative project with my brother Zach. He's a composer and has composed for films and video games. And so I approached him to see if he would be able to compose a track for each painting in the book. So he composed a unique original soundtrack. So a CD comes with the book, and it's a very meditative process. You can look at the art and enjoy the music. And so he commissioned over a dozen musicians all around the world to play like the cello and all these very interesting instruments that he composed for and he himself recorded too. So it's yeah, kind of neat to collaborate with your brother. During the pandemic, we had extra time to work on a project like that. And we decided, we're not going to get just down and depressed that we're stuck in our homes, in our studios, but how about we do a project that people might get around and support. And, we were able to crowdfund over 11,000 to be able to, cover the cost for this project. And so we're really pleased with the response that we've received so far from the project.
Well, Josh, thank you so much. I think this conversation is going to give people a lot of hope from a bit of a different angle, not just talking about, hope and virtue explicitly, but through the lens of art. And I think we have a tendency these days to focus so exclusively on science. Not that science and art are dichotomous. I mean, I think they have a lot in common, but we have a tendency to think that science will save us and art is kind of a luxury or frivolity. And I think what we're seeing, we're living now the costs of that kind of exclusive mindset. And I'm really grateful for your skill, your dedication to your work, your insight and your voice. We need the artists in a broad sense to be to be to be our moral conscience, I think. And I'm just very grateful to you for that. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Julie. And I love following your art too over the years. And that's how we first connected at an art show. And I just love, your mind, and you're brilliant. And I just really resonate with how you can be so creative, but also such a deep thinker as well. This has been a real pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed watching this video, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to the democracyfund.ca/donate.